Department of Health could pick and choose which New Yorkers to lock up or lock down. So they could have locked you in your home, or they could have removed you from your home and put you into a facility or a detention center of their choosing. So you had no say where you went. They decided how long you stayed there. They decided who went and who didn't, so they could literally separate families. I'm an attorney here in New York. I've been practicing for just about 25 years now. And before COVID, I was a property tax certiorari attorney. So I basically represented property owners, commercial properties, and residential properties. And I would sue the local governments on behalf of those clients if I felt that their property tax valuation and assessment was too high, if it was unfair, if it was unjust. So for 20 years or so, I have been suing local government, so towns and cities and villages and counties and such. And then when COVID came along, I really was absolutely astonished at the government's response to everything. It was a tremendous overreach. And, when I looked around me, March of 2020, when then Governor Cuomo, said, hey, everybody lock down, stay in your house, close your businesses, we're just going to do it for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I said, oh, no. The government doesn't do anything for 2 weeks. And I know that because I've been dealing with and suing local government for decades, right? So I know something about how they work. So I said, absolutely not. This is crazy. And people were reaching out. They didn't know, can I go to work? Do I have to stay home? Kids were locked at home with their parents trying to do school through Zoom, and college students were sent home. And, there was just so much suffering going on because people had to close their businesses. A lot of small businesses perished at that time because they couldn't keep their doors open because the government told them they couldn't, and then they couldn't pay their bills and they went belly up. So there was a lot of just mayhem. I started to give speeches really to try and help people understand what is going on, what their rights are, what's legal, what's not, what does the Constitution say about all this? I started making videos and posting them online, just kind of turned into, speaking out, becoming an activist really. And then somebody sent me this regulation. It was the isolation and quarantine procedures regulation. And it was at 10 NYCRR 2.13. And it was a regulation that was issued by the governor's Department of Health. So it was the state Department of Health. And I read it and they said to me, like, is this for real? And I said, well, unfortunately, it's for real. I said, but it is definitely not legal.
How long ago did you become aware of it?
I was aware of this in the end of 2021 because Hochul had become governor in August of 2021, and she was promulgating this regulation through her Department of Health. It actually started under Cuomo. The difference is that Cuomo was given special emergency powers by the legislature in March of 2020, which was then revoked in March of 2021. But Hochul didn't have the power to do this. This was something that should have gone through the legislature as a law. That's the correct way that should have been done. I'm not saying it would have been constitutional, even if the legislature did it, but she certainly did not have the power to do this through the Department of Health. That's the executive branch of government. We've got 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. The legislative body is the one that makes the laws. The executive branch is supposed to enforce the laws. So this was a clear violation of separation of powers. I knew that I had to get some New York State legislators involved in the case because with a lawsuit, you have to have what's called standing. So you have to have some sort of injury in order to bring a lawsuit. And in this case, other attorneys I spoke with said, oh, you need to wait until people are being locked up and, thrown into these facilities and such. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not waiting until people are thrown into quarantine facilities against their will with no way to get out. And Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Tague, Assemblyman Mike Lawler, they stepped up. They came on the lawsuit. They believed in it. They knew that this was completely unconstitutional. And then there was a whole nother group of New York State legislators who wrote an amicus brief to support my case. And that was Assemblyman Andy Goodell. He's also an attorney. He authored the brief. And then it was Assemblyman Joseph Giglio and Assemblyman Will Barkley who came on the lawsuit or came on the amicus brief to support my lawsuit. It turned into quite a strong argument. And in July, on July 8th, the Judge Ronald Plotz ruled in our favor. He said that this is not legal. You cannot make a regulation like this. They did not have the power to do this in the executive branch. He said it conflicted with existing New York State law, which was one of my main arguments. And he struck it down as unconstitutional, violation of separation of powers. Right now, the regulation is no longer. Just want to explain to people very briefly what that regulation said so they can get an idea of how horrific this was. The regulation said that the Department of Health could pick and choose which New Yorkers to lock up or lock down. So they could have locked you in your home, or they could have removed you from your home and put you into a facility or a detention center of their choosing. So you had no say where you went. They decided how long you stayed there. They decided who went and who didn't, so they could literally separate families. They could take your child, they could take you, they could take your parent, your elderly grandparent. There was no restriction on age. They put in the regulation that they got to use local law enforcement to help them enforce this order. So you could have literally gotten a knock on your door from either the sheriff or the local police saying, come with me. We have a decree here from the Department of Health. There was no time limit. So they could have kept you either locked up in your house or locked up in a facility for days, for weeks, for months. I mean, there was no restriction at all. They put in there a requirement that any physicians that suspected somebody of having a communicable disease had to report it to the authorities. Okay, so now they're weaponizing doctors, right? And
So I have to interrupt and just say this is so beyond COVID. If you think about what's happening now with monkeypox, what would happen if physicians suddenly started reporting like their gay men who came into their offices and had monkeypox? Like they could separate, families and put these men into prisons. And I mean, the civil liberties violations are just, it's astonishing to hear. I mean, right? This is beyond COVID.
This is, yes, I want to point out that the regulation was not COVID specific. So the regulation was very broad. It was a communicable disease. It was not COVID-19, right? And the other thing I want to point out is that they didn't have to prove that you actually had a disease. They could just think, maybe you were exposed. Well, maybe you were, maybe you weren't. It didn't matter. They could still issue an order of isolation or quarantine to you with no evidence whatsoever, no proof against you whatsoever. And the really scary thing, I mean, all of this is scary, but particularly scary is that you had no way to get out. So what I mean by that is, and I'll give you an example, when we were doing oral arguments in front of the judge asked the Attorney General's office, because the governor and the Department of Health are being represented by the Attorney General, Letitia James, and her army of lawyers. And so the judge asked them, well, if you take a family and you've got them, locked up in a facility or a hospital, whatever, how do they get out? The response after a moment of silence from the Attorney General's office was, well, they could hire a lawyer and they could sue to get out, and the judge's response was exactly what I was thinking in my mind, like, well, sue to get out of basically prison when you put these people in there with no proof they had a disease, that takes time. Lawsuits take time. I mean,
money.
They take time, they take money, they take energy, they take resources, and all the while you're going to have a family locked up in a facility or a hospital because you think maybe they were exposed and you have no proof against them. I mean, it was just, the regulation shocked the conscience. It was unbelievable, unconstitutional on many levels. And so we were extremely pleased when the court ruled in our favor. But I have to say, you know, the Attorney General has filed a notice of appeal against me, which means that, you know, the governor and the Attorney General plan to appeal this decision. They're going to try and get a higher court to overturn it so that they can get that power back. That should speak volumes to New Yorkers right there.
Is there anything like this on the books anywhere in any other state?
To my knowledge, there are no regulations like this in other states. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just that I'm not aware of them. Right. This was the first and only lawsuit of its kind in the country. There were no other cases that struck down or tried to strike down a regulation of isolation and quarantine through the Department of Health. You know, I have been told that Florida has a law that is a quarantine law that's different than a regulation. The difference is a law comes through the legislature. That's, you know, the people that you vote into office. Here, this came through the Department of Health. So the Department of Health, obviously, those are not elected positions, right? We don't go and vote for the commissioner of health, right? We don't go and vote for the people that work in the Department of Health. So
bureaucrats, just like Barbara Ferrer in California, who's imposing all kinds of crazy mandates on Los Angeles.
Yes, they're bureaucrats, they're appointed. So here in New York specifically, Governor Hochul is the governor. She gets to appoint who is the head of the Department of Health, who is the head of the Department of Transportation, the Department of Education. New Yorkers, wake up, we have an election in 2 months, right? November 8th is election day here in New York. The governor wants to be she wants to be elected. She wasn't elected yet. She wants 4 more years at this. Letitia James, who's the Attorney General right now, is running for re-election. She wants another 4 years in office. Do you really want to vote for people that have no regard for the Constitution, that don't care that their regulation was struck down by a judge saying it's unconstitutional and illegal, and they want to try and get that power back regardless? And by the way, guess whose money they use? You know, if they go ahead with this appeal and they're going to fight me in appellate court, they're using our money to do that. There's been very little coverage. This is an election year in New York. And I think they know, if the voters knew that Kathy Hochul, who's running for governor, and Letitia James, who's running for AG, were doing this, I think there would be a tremendous pushback. And I think the November 8th election would go strongly against Hochul and strongly against Letitia James. But they're keeping it so quiet. People, New Yorkers, just don't know about this. Even New Yorkers who are relatively informed on what's going on. Oh, they think, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. I can assure you, it is not a conspiracy theory, because I just spent the entire year fighting this lawsuit. It is not a conspiracy theory. It was there, and I struck it down, and it is no longer. But they have vowed to appeal. Of course, I think they're going to wait until after the election to see what happens. But yeah, this is happening, and the word needs to be spread, because New Yorkers need to know what their leadership is doing. The whole reason I took up this case, and I did it pro bono, and I knew I had to put aside my own practice to do this, was because I knew if this took hold in New York State, it would then spread like wildfire across the country. And we would see quarantine facilities popping up in states across the nation. And once that happened, there'd be no place left to run and hide. I mean, as you know, Natalia, I mean, thousands, if not millions, of New Yorkers have fled the state in the past 2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
They have left, they have gone to more free states, but it can only stay free if we all stay free, because once we have tyranny in one state, it will spread. 100%.
I agree. I mean, my family came here in 1977 from the Soviet Union. So this is the kind of horror story I used to hear that would happen there. If somebody snitched on somebody and then they came to take them away in the night. I mean, all these, books like Isaac Bashevis Singer and all these, old books about, shtetls and just, old Russian stories are all about this. And my parents were always thankful that could never happen in this country. But it turns out that it can. Well, thankfully, right now it can't. But I think that more light on this is probably the best, we can do, making sure that people hear about this and are aware that their freedom is very, it's hanging by a thread. And it's wonderful that people like you can stand up to big government and overreach, but it's the same thing that's happening in California. Julie Hamill is suing LA County for their mask mandates, and she's also an attorney just like you, a mom who's putting aside her own practice to fight the injustices and fight Barbara Ferrer.
People that can should stand up and fight. And if you're not able to stand up and fight, and you can't be on the front lines, you can't speak out because of whatever reason, you're afraid to lose your job, or you're afraid to lose your customers or your family or your friends or what, that's fine. I totally understand that. But then at least support the people who are standing up, support the people who are putting their neck out there and pushing back in a major way. And we actually have a lawsuit website set up so that people can go to this website, get information. You can read the judge's decision. The link to the judge's decision is on there. At the end of the judge's decision is the actual regulation itself. So you could read the regulation and see what it said. We have flyers that you can download and post on your social media to share this information with other people. We have, outreach efforts that people can get involved with. There's a donate button. You can donate if you're so inclined. www.unitingnys.com/lawsuit. That has a lot of information there that people can get. If you want to follow me personally, I have a Substack now. It's attorneycox.substack.com.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and keep us posted on the appeal. We definitely need to know what's happening. I mean, this is huge, and we advocate for children and families, and this has incredible implications for families. I mean, separating families. We've been so upset about families being separated at the border, but here we're talking about families being separated or contained in New York State, American families. So I think it's really important. So thank you so much for all your effort. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your summer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Natalia. I really appreciate it.